Hello, welcome to the book report. Um, Got another good one. How Much is Enough? Money and the Good Life by Robert Skidelsky and Edward Skidelsky. Um, I really enjoyed this book. It had a fair amount of philosophy in it, which I have not read much of lately and obviously miss a little bit. um, Very well thought out book. I like any book, I disagree with parts of it, but in general, very much support the spirit and basic idea of the book, which is against endless growth and endless material acquisition of money for no reason except to have more money than the other guy, and to develop a sense of the good life apart from accumulation of wealth, so that we can collectively develop a future that is sustainable and desirable from a human perspective. In fact, one of the last paragraphs in the book I will read to you, and I think sums up the core of it quite well, but I'm going to start with a little critique first. So, no, actually not a critique, but, oh, yes, I am actually. So, but before I start with this critique, I will say I did like how they captured the angst, the the hamster wheel reality of a lot of people in the Anglo-American world, at least. I think the French and the Germans, parts of Europe, have gotten away from that to a degree, but the English and North Americans not so much. And I think they captured a lot of that very well. But my biggest critique of this book is just a very small part of it. I do recommend this book, but they have one chapter about environmentalism, and it's just unhinged. I mean, I think, have not read very much environmentalist thought. I think they've probably only read a couple of very sharp and unlearned critiques of modern environmentalism, because they're way off base. Um, so, uh, so here I'll read from their Limits to Growth, Natural or Moral, which is basically a big critique of environmentalism that's unhinged, not based on reality at all. Okay, the argument from global warming to growth reduction is so weak that one reaches for deeper explanations of its persistent appeal. Such explanations are not hard to come by. Most climate radicals are also passionate haters of greed and luxury, people who in previous ages might have been Cromwells or Savanellarians. I don't even know who that is. Infusing a good deal of environmentalist literature is a love of the hair shirt. The Puritan accent is unmistakable. Strangest here, and then he quotes George Monbiot, who I've heard of, but is certainly not a leader in the environmentalist movement. At least not one that I've been involved in since the '80s. Right, a fringe character at best. And anyway, I'm not even going to read the quote from the hair shirt. I mean, come on. Infusing a good deal of the environmentalist literature is a love of the hair shirt. That's crazy. And I mean, I have read a lot of, deep ecology, a lot of environmentalist literature, from species protection to ecosystem protection. I mean, I'm an environmentalist. I used to canvass for Greenpeace. Um, and sane freeze. Nuclear weapons is an environmental issue as much as anything. So I'm a longtime environmentalist. I've done a lot of reading. I don't think I've read a single environmentalist book that even mentioned hair shirts. Not one. I mean, it's just bizarre. And also global warming and growth reduction. I mean, yes, there are some corners of the environmentalist movement that want to see a reduction, or actually a contraction, economic contraction, but they're a very small minority. I think the key, it's not really growth or no growth. It's sustainability, and including all factors of the economy, particularly pollution, energy inputs, pollution outputs, closing the circle, and accounting for all externalities, basically getting rid of externalities, right? Which has been a way that some companies have made profits to the detriment of the environment over the last 100 years or more, 200 years. But increasingly the last, 50, 60 years. Anyway, needless to say, their reading of the environmentalist literature is extremely limited and way off base. But that's just one chapter in the book. It's really an excellent book overall, and nothing else was as nearly off base as that. Okay, and then they talk about one part. They talk about basic goods. What is a basic good? And then they talk about universal, right? So basic goods are universal. And quote, to see the universal through the particular requires strong philosophical intuitions guided by the testimony of different ages and cultures. This latter proviso is frequently forgotten. Too often the intuitions of modern philosophers simply repeat the platitudes of early 21st century liberalism. A more philosophical cast of mind might question the equation of universal with modern liberal values. After all, from the standpoint of eternity, our own civilization is just as parochial as any other. So I appreciate what they're getting at, but I think to include historical attitudes in the universal is a mistake. I mean, basically, almost every culture throughout almost all of history, had a concept of slavery as acceptable in some form, had demonization of the other as legitimate in some form. I mean, the list could go on and on and on. I mean, just because something was a part of most cultures for most of history doesn't make it a universal good that is acceptable today with a modern mindset. I mean, I appreciate what they're getting. I mean, I think you need to cherry pick a little bit when you bring in all of history into what a modern good is, right? So, but I appreciate what they're getting at. You have to appreciate the history of a culture, and you have to appreciate cultural differences. And I do agree with that. I just think there's some room for debate there, and when you go into history, the mindset is so radically different from a modern mindset that a lot of modern thinkers are unaware of that, particularly around things like slavery, demonization of the other, and even the individual, the rights of the individual, right? Most cultures and most times, individuals didn't have that many rights unless you were among the elite, perhaps. So anyway, but I get the spirit of it, right? There are cultural differences. So now we're getting to the good parts. One of the things I really enjoyed and got out of this book was their definition of leisure. I had encountered it before, but they explored it and um, presented it in a way I had never quite heard before, or at least maybe I was younger and didn't appreciate it. Anyway, I love their definition of leisure. So, leisure, in contemporary parlance, leisure is synonymous with relaxation and rest. But there is another older conception of leisure, according to which it is not just time off work, but a special form of activity in its own right. Leisure, in this sense, is that which we do for its own sake, not as a means to something else. The philosopher Leo Strauss wrote of his friend Kurt Reisler that, quote, the activity of his mind had the character of noble and serious employment of leisure, not of harried labor, close quote. It is in this sense that we wish leisure to be understood. So, and then I'll add another sentence a little further down. Paid work could be leisure in our sense, if undertaken not primarily as a means to money, but for its own sake. So, anyway, I really appreciated their exploration of leisure and the good life in general, and particularly appreciated that definition of leisure. And just to sum up, let's see which paragraph. Let's see, this was last full paragraph. Here we go. So, and this is pretty much towards the end with a great title to this chapter, Exits from the Rat Race. So, anyway, the material basis of our updated version of Keynes' The Economic Possibilities is rooted in the logic that gave rise to his possibilities in the first place. The long-term decrease in the demand for labor resulting from continuous improvements in labor productivity. We can either turn this to our advantage by greatly expanding the domain of shared work and leisure, a solution that at least some European countries have adopted, or continue with the Anglo-American system of want creation powered by insatiability, maintained at the cost of growing job insecurity and income inequality, and heedless of humanity's future. I think that paragraph is brilliant, right on the mark, and pretty much sums up their attitude, which I wholeheartedly support. The broad spirit, obviously I had a few criticisms, but that I broadly support, which is that we need to get away from this rat race mentality, that more is always better, and cultivate a sense of the good life. And they do mention Keynes more than once, which I think, and Keynes talked about the good life too, and making the good life available to the middle classes and working classes, and raising up the working class as the economy continues to grow. And really, we're at that point now. There's no reason for poverty in the United States. There's no reason even for lower working class. We are so wealthy that it's really frankly criminal that we've distributed resources in the way that we have. But I think they make an excellent point that a key part of the solution is cultivating a sense of what the good life is, which is going to be different for everybody, of course. But to make that the goal, to live life well, not just to have stuff, but to live a good life, and to live it well, and to develop personality, develop your humanity. So anyway, excellent book. How Much is Enough? Well worth reading if you're interested in the longer term future of our economy and how we need to, particularly the Anglo-Americans, get away from the rat race, although obviously even the European countries that are moving away from it still have a ways to go as well. But anyway, happy reading.